saw your paper on, Triton GPT being kind of a neural network that is kind of bad at math, and obviously all the kind of like an umbrella, being this an umbrella term. So I wanted to show you something that I am implementing right now that is kind of going to the heart of this discussion maybe, which is that, hey, this is now a Triton GPT large language model system, right? That is now collected to a module that is Wolfram Alpha or Wolfram 1, right? And so if you can see, let me see if I can kind of scroll this down, right? So I'm asking a series of mathematical or STEM related questions.
Okay.
So that it can kind of give me some answers, and I'm also maybe kind of flavoring this a little bit with educational aspects, like, hey, maybe the answers should be, for a beginner student, or maybe the answer should be more advanced, right? So I think definitely now this combination of tools, um, like, if you can see, it's a pretty strong mathematical engine now with large language model interpreting the question, and then a dedicated mathematical or computational engine kind of dealing with the mathematical aspects. And then kind of extended this. There was this professor at UC San Diego, and he asked a question whether uh, cosmology is kind of, or science in the area of cosmology is really maybe missing a point, right? So I started a big discussion with the AI on cosmology, right? And one of the coolest things that can happen is that you can have a theoretical discussion that is based on the knowledge base that is within the neural network and the knowledge base that is outside the neural network. But also then, how cool is that, right? Loading the cosmology package to do computations. So if you want to figure out, what's going to be the amount of cosmic radiation, or what is going to be the weight of dark matter if it exists, right? Then you can actually do computations that can deal with this, right? So to answer the questions that you are posing in your paper, I think the AI is now fantastic at math.
Well, can I put a spin on it and get
Oh yeah.
because I love this example, right? And I do think that you come from a point of view which I totally respect, which is, I might be the hallucinator here, but you know the reality. You see what I mean? And people give they humanize things that are not human sometimes. And my point about math was not necessarily probably the world of math itself, because much of math, at least as I understand it, is about seeing bigger relationships and coming up with, let's say, a formula or something, or some relationship, right? I mean, figuring out a relationship is the language of math. Doing the math, though, 2 plus 2 is kind of what I meant as bad at math. Does that make sense? So the thing is, the answer to plug 2 numbers into a formula and ask for the answer to be correct is what I think GPT is bad at. And the reason I am pointing it out is that since calculators, right, we made these things to not be incorrect at 2 plus 2. Because that's their utility to us. So my hope, and again, we can discuss this, is not that it couldn't see, by the way, it could probably come up with, it has come up with formulas that are more efficient than the ones people came up with, because it can do that kind of thing, but it might get the answer wrong. I'll pause, and I want you to shoot me down, because I know this is where I'm making stuff up and you know the real answer.
Yeah, so usually I agree with you. I think that so if you kind of what you are saying, right? Like okay, so there is a concept of number two, right? And there is a concept of maybe two, you know, two workers or two employees that are doing something, right? And
Mhm.
then how do we quantify what they do? What's number two is representing, right?
Mhm.
So on the trivial level, right? Like for abstract mathematical computation, right? Totally abstract, right? This is a really easy computational question, right? Like
Mhm.
you're doing basic algebra on something, right? Now, and then if you are taking this to the next level, like, hey, I have two people and can I add up whatever they are producing? What's their productivity level? If they are together as two units versus one, right? We obviously know that this is kind of becoming a much deeper question, right? Because perhaps a team of two is going to be a lot more efficient, or perhaps the other way around. Perhaps they don't jive together and they just gonna waste time on kind of going against each other. So their productivity is not going to be 5, the productivity is going to be 1.5, right? So something like
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, but I think we have computational tools now that can actually, see the actual model that you want to apply to a seemingly algebraic, equation that is trivial, and then kind of look into, so what do I do with this, right? So in AI, there was a big area that was fuzzy logic, which was
Yeah.
exactly
Oh, right.
that
Yeah.
question,
Right.
right? Like
Which, by the
I'm
way, is sort of a subset of ML now. Isn't that kind of where, is that true?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Could be applied, right? So yeah, so you're
So if the
looking at number
humidity
two, but
outside is a little higher, I'm going to cook this rice a little less, or something like that. I thought
yeah,
that's
yeah,
oh, it was
yeah.
it was more able to take on complex variables rather than it being like, yes, you cook this for 10 minutes and it'll be
Mm,
done. Something like that is
yeah,
fuzzy math.
yeah.
Remember.
Yeah, so I guess what the point that I'm trying to make is that now you don't have to be a graduate student to actually apply those concepts to an addition, whether 2 + 2 = 4, or maybe it's a different number, right? Because you can take predicate calculus and you can ask the large language model to formulate a logical statement that is going to represent what you want. And then on top of that, you can layer the uncertainty that you might have about, well, the 2 + 2 is not really 2 + 2. I think it's kind of like from 1.5 to 2.5, right?
Mhm.
So you can layer probabilities, and then you can do things like, hey, give me maybe a Monte Carlo simulation, how this might look like when I'm getting maybe the worst case scenario or the best case scenario, or the distribution of everything in between, so that 2 + 2 actually on the balance of probabilities is actually not 4, but you can get the insight into why.
Okay, so I'm gonna concede that GPT is not bad at math. However, my underlying statement was I'm a big fan of mental models, right? Like people
Mm,
have an idea of how the world works, and they usually operate as if they know how the world works. Okay,
mm,
so we call it a mental model just because, hey, if I do this, that, and the other thing, I should get this in return. Things like that. I don't know.
mm.
That's a model. And mental models can be changed, right? Or they can be learned. You can learn new things, and therefore you can change your mind. So there's
Yes.
model. That's all.
Mm,
Um, so I wanted to attack the mental model that this is a computer that is programmed. That's why I'm saying it's bad at math. Now, what I'm wondering, and you can say I'm wrong, which I'm probably wrong, is that you can, as a producer of these engines, GPT-4 or whatever they're called, I don't know, they always have new names every day, right? But they're new versions that people are in the background, in the back, prompting it to be able to be better at certain areas. You see what I mean? Like less
mm,
racist, better at math is what
mm.
I'm saying. Is like they might just be using plugins, if you know what I'm saying, like just
Yeah.
to address people's concerns. Because if I say, hey, here's my checking account, what should I spend for a house? If it gets the math off by one, zero,
Mhm, mhm.
the answer is completely wrong. You see what I mean? Like and that's easy for GPT to do. Now you can shut me down. Go ahead. I'm probably making no point.
Ye- Yeah, so I think this is a good time for us to define what do we mean actually by GPT, right? What do we mean by a large language model? So
Mm-hmm.
in this example that I shown you at the beginning, what we mean in terms of the system architecture is that we have this large language model that kind of is basically like a librarian that can go into the appropriate shelf and pick the book that is going to have the machinery or the model that answers your question, right? So
Oh,
if I have a question about 2 plus 2, you don't want maybe an average person, with maybe non-STEM education to solve
well,
mathematical
the
problems
Dr.
for
Seuss
you, right?
section might be out. You know what I mean? But
Exactly,
maybe it's
exactly,
relevant
exactly,
depending
right.
on who's asking the question. But keep going.
But you have the large language model who can be that librarian that will pick the right book or a resource, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
right? That will answer your question. So if you have a mathematical question, maybe it will pick a book that is about algebra or calculus or something, and it will take it for you off the shelf, and it will formulate the problem using the language from that book, right? So this could be like a multiple calls, like a in AI they call it like a reverse call or whatever. So basically, it's going to look into the content of that book. It will understand that it can answer your question, and then
Mm-hmm.
will do the computation for you, right? So this is a large language
Right.
model basically with an agent or a plugin, however we want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if this is the architecture that you're talking about, or you are kind of thinking about in terms of, well, okay, so what if it is wrong, right? Then it's the likelihood of the system being wrong is a lot less, right? Because it has a very deep resource that goes into the model that is necessary to answer your question, right? So if it doesn't have it, if that is not available, then obviously we can talk about the large language models hallucinating or confabulating or being wrong, right? But if it has that, then it will rely on that specialized tool to answer your question. And the success rate in that kind of architecture is very high
Mm-hmm.
because the large language model may not have enough to understand everything about the specific vertical or domain that you're looking for, but it will know enough to find a very good resource for you. So if that resource is available, then that agent that is, let's say, a mathematical engine, or that agent that is going to be understanding the investment world or mortgage world or whatever, if that is available, then that's a huge, I would say, sign, or that it sways the probability of the answer being correctly, enormously into the positive territory.
100%. And maybe this is when the second point comes in because we're both educators. I really love this idea of it being a librarian, by the way. That's a good mental
Mm,
model in a way
mm,
because filtering is difficult for most people. You might just say, hey, I've read this one book and that's answered all the questions. I tend to lean on Daniel Kahneman's thinking fast and slow way too much because I'm like, well, this has
mm,
so much in it. It must have all the answers. I don't need to read 50 other books when I've got the one
mm,
book. You see what I mean? And I'm lazy, like many of us are. So GPT isn't necessarily lazy, which is a plus. But what I'm
mm,
hoping to say is that when it comes to being educated, part of what we're assessed on is that we get the right answer. And I'm going with math as an easy version, right? Because math could say, hey, if you didn't show your work and you got the wrong answer, I'm marking this as a zero. You're wrong, right?
mm,
Empirically. And I just went into this whole I don't want to get into this about Nike reformulating their entire product line to be more measurable and how it was a disaster, right? Because countability is kind of the thing as we get into this article that I'm hoping could change, right? Like maybe counting things isn't that valuable. Maybe EBITDA isn't what you should measure about a team working together, right? Like you and I work together 8 hours a day. So our combined productivity is 16 hours of good stuff, right? Our combined productivity might be 0,
Mm.
or it could be exponentially high or whatever, right? Because
Mm.
we're two humans. We aren't a product of the time we spend, although I hope
Yeah.
the time we spend is valuable to you as it is to me. But um,
Mm.
on that thought, so taking the headline out of being bad at math, do you see a need to communicate to people that there's something else this does that is not empirically provable by its outcomes, right? Like it can't get, you can't give it a problem that R should solve. And I'm using R as an example because I consider it a horrible language that I hate. But but it does
Mm.
do correlations, right? It's the
Mm.
only thing I know that does, and correlations are tons of fun and valuable, right? So I'll stop. Anything there that you feel like you can educate me in better?
Well, so let's say you get an answer, right? And that answer is maybe coming from a system that can emulate how our language works, right? Or maybe in broader perspective, let's say in data analytics, right? You connect your large language model, you formulate a natural language question, and that question gets into a specialized tool, maybe in analytics or maybe in investment or whatever, right? So then the problem might be is the answer actually, however perfect it might be mathematically, however perfect it might be from whatever other criteria you might have, is it actually answering your question, your need, right? So I'm dealing with let's say use cases where, let's say, in fund management, I have very seasoned professionals that manage very large amount of funds, and sometimes what they expect from the AI is they ask a question that typically they type into Google, right? Like, give me a budget, right? And then press enter, right? So, and obviously, budget about what, right? What kind of award? What kind of part of it? Do you mean that this was meant for this fiscal year or previous fiscal year, right? So you cannot just have one sentence question and expect the correct answer because it's
That's how
far.
Google works, by the way.
Exactly, and maybe Google works because it is kind of recording all the previous prompts or questions that you asked in the past. It knows kind of your profile, so it knows a lot about you. So in most cases, right,
let's
if you
let's
are,
take a quick sidebar. How does
yeah,
Google work? No, I'm
mm,
kidding. Like,
yeah,
either way, I'm sure it is. They are terrified. That's all I think of as Google, right? Like, because the way it works probably is not the way GPT works in
yes,
terms of
yeah,
so.
yeah,
So
and
we just want
but
to dig at Google because people love us to put up dirt. But yes, that sort of question answer format is not valid
yeah,
anymore.
exactly, yeah, exactly, and that's probably a topic for another discussion, right? Like,
Next
what
week.
is the difference between Google, right, and the large language model? And my feeling is that they actually might be getting closer and closer, which with maybe the tool like Perplexity,
Perplexity,
kind
yeah,
of
I was
like
gonna say,
in
right?
kind of in the middle there, right? It's a little bit of both worlds, right? But let's say coming back to the original
Mhm.
kind of idea, right? Like you are getting an answer, and it might not be irrelevant, right? So then what do you do, right? So the beautiful thing about large language models is that you can have a conversation. You can kind of use that concept, that is attention span of a large language model, so it will remember prior conversations within the limit of the input window size, and then it will allow you to refine and maybe pick specific items from previous answers and have a conversation about those, right?
Can I just
So yeah,
mention, in
yeah,
the most unhuman way possible, it can remember entire blocks of concepts and later in the conversation apply those entire blocks of concepts to a new concept. Just had this happen the other day in a conversation where you could just reference it by a keyword, which I just found amazing, right? Because usually people have a hard time with that. We're going to have a hard time remembering how we started this conversation, right?
Mm.
but it doesn't, which is kind of amazing, because it is the beauty of this conversational style, is that it tends to have less empirical answers, right? A Google style. Here it is. Here's the potential answers and the sources. Whereas, well, maybe this isn't the right answer. Again, is the answer 5 to your budget people? The answer is 7%, 2%. I don't know what a budget looks like, but you know what I mean. Is could you give me examples of budgets? You could basically have a conversation about budgets, but you can't really get a budget, or you shouldn't, maybe.
Well, yeah. So you can, right? So again, if your one of your tools is access to a database, then you can have real numbers, right? So you don't have to rely on the memory of the neural network to give you an answer. But if we think about what this kind of enables, the point you are making, that it can remember very specific things, and it can remember also big chunks of very specific things, then this is kind of enormous. Because I mean, who would actually take for granted something like having a conversation about a calculus topic, right? Like solving an integral, right? Something that maybe an advanced mathematician would need to have, like weeks to actually complete. You can have like a pros and cons discussion about a solution in calculus, but so this is kind of enormous, and also in other areas. I mean, people are now feeding into those large language models works of philosophers, and they are trying to find contradictions between their statements and kind of maybe synthesize something like, maybe Freud and Jung and whatever, what was similar things that they thought about, what are the conflicts, right? So if somebody is willing to have a conversation with the AI, then this is really like a game changer, because you can have a conversation about the code, like a computer code, like a program, like R maybe. You can have a conversation about a concept that is in physics or cosmology. You can have a conversation about the philosophical concept, and you can have a conversation about nutrition maybe, or however whatever is your interest. And as long as you have access to appropriate tools that have up-to-date knowledge, then this is enormous, an enormous tool with with a few kind of things that I think are still on the drawing boards. Like, so what would be the actionable item? Like you and I, we talk a lot about management. Like, how do we improve the organization, kind of organizational behavior, or solve management problems? Like, you can ask a question, how can I do something better? But then should the answer be just a paragraph? Oh, you should do this and that. Or is the answer supposed to be maybe a multimedia answer, in which there's going to be like a tutorial, that you can show to a team, that is going to explain the dynamics that you should be paying attention to? Or maybe it should be a video, that the new models that are coming up maybe next year will enable you to generate actually video recording, maybe of a person talking to you, or maybe it's going to be some sort of a case study where, often in those corporate training systems, there's going to be like various scenarios that they are showing on videos, and they are kind of asking people to evaluate and detect, maybe problems or issues that are important to a corporation, right? So I think we are looking at game changers practically everywhere.
Well, that is very much kind of the third point, is to in the article, I think, is that the human part, right? You're talking about a whole manner of decision support systems, which is kind of what I love in my career, right? And then you're saying, well, in order to make a decision, I like this metaphor of a librarian, right? Like, because is there a librarian in most corporate settings? I'm gonna go with no, right? Like, there isn't anyone with domain knowledge within usually the company itself. There might be pockets of domain knowledge, but maybe that is another role that might be augmented or supplanted by AI. I'm never really quite sure. You know, this is the real puzzle when it comes to boots on the ground. Like, I can see individual use cases, but you're involved a little bit in institutionalizing some of this. So do
Yeah.
you see that people, because I'll go back to this Nike debacle, which is you can't just fire everybody and replace them and do something. You see what I mean? You can't do these
Yeah.
whole human changes because humans don't like to change. You know, they're very reticent, and usually they can take the whole company down with it, apparently, right? When they are too much change. We'll see if that holds true. But without getting too much into that, I'm more interested in education, right? Which is, we can't fire all the teachers, I don't think. But can anyone imagine augmenting them? Can anyone imagine even how this plays a role? Because I'm working in one of the, I guess I'm working for a pretty good university at Northwestern, right? We have no plans, and we are the arm of the group that would probably make the most use of this technology. Even now, I think, isn't it my last paragraph, or maybe it's something else? Like, I got the GPT to do all the work that I asked my students to do in 5 minutes that we take 10 weeks to do. And it did a fine job, by the way. You know, no complaints, really. What I learned is probably only I could prompt it. Because the students don't know how to ask for the things, sort of. But maybe that's unfair. You could probably just feed in the assignment rubric, you know what I mean? And pretty good. So that was a lot to unpack. I'm just saying humans aren't ready for it. GPT is bad at math, meaning it's good at the things that humans are good at, which is maybe with the concern. Out of all that, can you unpack anything that you vehemently disagree with me on? Because I think I might have stretched it a bit.
Well, so going into the question of whether those librarians are there or not, right? Well, maybe they are, maybe they are not available, but for sure, if there is one, they're gonna be busy, right?
I
Because
think I've answered that. They're
so
busy and kind of peeved, by the
yes,
way.
so if somebody is a domain expert, right, they will be in a huge demand, and it's not like you can book their time and they gonna answer your questions day and night, at any time you wish. So de facto, right, the librarian or an domain expert is kind of difficult to find, no matter what. So having an AI that it can kind of play that role in maybe in an educational setting as a professor that will have infinite patience for a student, not maybe not paying attention in class, but now, the day before the exam, you have to kind of make up a lot of material, right? And that's going to be at night, right? Or maybe there's in the corporate settings, you need to complete a project and you really don't know the schema of your database, but there is metadata available, and the AI is going to look at the metadata and will generate for you that SQL statement that only one other guy within the whole organization can do it for you. And by the way, he is booked for the next 2 weeks. I think that's great, right? So what we are working towards is maybe the old good knowledge management, which was in every single AI book for the past 50 years. There was always a knowledge management chapter in those AI books. But it was kind of always, so how do we do that, right? So I mean, how do I actually represent that knowledge? But now you have a system that can digest it in seconds, just to represent to it, right? So it could be course materials, maybe it could be some sort of an organizational, chart, or however you want to represent it. Now those knowledge management tasks that will enrich the knowledge that AI needs to answer any question, they are now feasible.
Well, and yes, I think you hit upon. I think one of the biggest changes is what struck me about the Nike situation is that what people do is they make up ridiculous KPIs, right? And they tend to correlate meeting KPIs with other KPIs such as EBITDA and making money or whatever people do in a business, right? Or
Mm.
however they do it, it's all about numbers. Chat
Mm.
GPT is bad at math. The
Mm.
thing is that it's really good at maybe other ways to measure whether Mike and Jack are good partners, other than numbers. And I think that was the fallacy of the Nike experiment, was to rely solely on numbers to run the business rather than qualitative things, which, as we've just stated, like, hey, you don't have access to SMEs, we can manufacture you one. So we could get 2, 3 interns and a manufactured GPT-based SME and say, come up with some ideas that you want to improve our company with and present them.
Yeah.
See what I mean? Like, there could
Mm.
be, yeah, is that utopia or dystopia? What do you think, Jack?
Yeah. Well, so yeah, so I guess uh, so coming back to the math question, right? Like
Mhm. It's the
if
sorry,
you
management thing that you mentioned earlier. The problem was
yeah,
measurement. Measurement's
yes,
always hard. Six Sigma. Don't remind me. You see what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah. So the measurement is also kind of a similar, if even if it is qualitative, right? It's
Mhm.
also always going to be about, so how do you define exactly the measurement metrics. So what I did recently was to apply AI for AI safety, right? So we wanted to detect whether maybe something in user prompts was inappropriate, right? From many different perspectives, right?
Mhm.
And maybe also in the answer from the AI, right? What is the AI providing answers that are maybe inflammatory, maybe socially backwards, or maybe maybe there's something about exclusion there. So maybe not even obvious things, but things that are really difficult to define. Like how do you define exclusion? If you look at sources and research, there's going to be like 10 definitions at least. So yeah, so all this is doable right now as well, right? So for our AI safety problem, we applied an ensemble of large language models. So it's not only GPT 4.5, but also other models from other
So wait, you
vendors.
now have a UN of language models, just to make sure that we don't
Yeah,
invade the wrong country or offend.
exactly, right? Because those large language models will not exactly agree on qualitative concepts. So the idea is, hey, let's have a vote, right? If you have 4 or 5 very strong models at the level of GPT 4.5, then the probability of you getting a correct answer from an ensemble is probably higher, right? And sometimes there's going to be situations, and especially for in those sensitive areas where not even one incorrect answer or one racist statement is allowable, right? So you need to have maybe like a team of experts that you can
Mhm.
apply to a qualitative concept, right? So that is now doable as well. So I'm kind of in my answers to your questions, I'm always very optimistic, because I kind of
I
see
think
where
we
this
both
is
are.
going.
I think
Yeah,
it's the technology side. Hopefully, this is the beginning of sharing many of these conversations with others, because you are very much the expert in the technical side. I'm hoping to be the human psychological side, as we talked earlier about philosophies and things like that, where the ultimate goal is that you've influenced, right? You've
yeah,
you've moved someone away from stasis, perhaps, right? Or
mm,
you've made a decision based on not necessarily doing all the work yourself, but using this librarian concept. Say, hey, I don't know, I don't know how to refinish my floors, but at the moment I kind of trust the algorithms in YouTube to give me examples of people who would show me how to refinish my floors. So,
yeah,
while we get these abilities now for free, it still is up to me to get the equipment and learn to apply it in my job or in my hobby or whatever scope it is. What I think companies will be afraid of is the not having the exactitude of a adding machine. You know, it isn't. It's the problems that we had with management cybernetics, you know, even back in the day, right? Is that you can't, in a sense, say that so and so's charisma isn't really the reason that people have a enjoyment of working in this division and why the division's successful. You know, it's this sort of ineffable thing that we've always had. Whereas I find GPT's abilities to be similar to that. Like they can pull stuff out of thin air, which is kind of not like Google. You know, it takes another search and then another search and then cross-referencing the two. You see what I mean? Like you have pieces, you don't have the full picture.
Yeah. And you know, and this at the end of the day, that could be a little bit dystopian, right? Because you know, let's say you know, when I was a student, I really liked courses that had those VHS or DVD recordings, so that I could go to the library and actually spend hours kind of going back and forth the VHS tape or a DVD, and kind of make notes on things that maybe I didn't understand first 5 times I listened to it, but on the 10th time I begin to get it, right? So does it mean that I don't need an instructor? I don't know. Maybe for some students, you know, the presence of an instructor, right, or an expert in a physical, right, is kind of essential. Maybe
I give
not,
it a
right?
thumbs down. I've never taught in person for the past 5 years, and it's on purpose because everyone wants to have the control, right? The
Yeah.
students want to have the control rather than me having the control. Meaning, if you don't show up, you know, and if you're not here to get my personal attention, you see what I mean? You don't get anything. Now,
Yeah.
again, I think a lot of people are in school just to give them a place to go, not necessarily to learn anything. But if
Mm.
you're interested in engaging with people, I think it has to be on their terms, like your VHS. I just think it's because you have the control, right? You can move on when you feel like it, which is really
Mm.
important to.
Yeah, maybe it's about control, or maybe it's about personal kind of training, right? Personal background, right? I trained myself. I understood that I have to go over a concept like 5 or 10 times before I understand it. And I knew that this was a limitation, and I knew that I have to do it for me to pass an exam, right? So if we transform this concept to maybe other areas, you know, in business or whatever, right? There's going to be people who maybe don't need a very smart AI because all they need is that recording and they go back and forth, right?
Mhm.
But there is also going to be people who are in the hurry that they need to have a summary that is made, you know, in a stellar fashion, you know, like really kind of going into the heart of the problem, right? And you need to get this email because you have a deadline, right? And you need to summarize the topic, right? So for that you need maybe a better large language model to kind of do that, right? And then there is going to be in engineering, for example, you will have to have neural networks and all these ecosystems that are great at math and great at, you know, applying it to engineering problems, right? So if we think about the spectrum of the person who is or kind of like personalities or profiles of people who interact with AI, there's going to be a wide range of kind of preferences, personal kind of capabilities. And some people just need to listen to a concept once, right? And they got it. Some people like me, they need to listen to a concept many times to get it, and they have to make notes. And some people need to see an image or a graphic, or people need to talk a person to kind of get it because they are social, right? And that person can be an avatar, maybe, or that could be a real person, right? To have like a real life connection. So yeah, I think we are in for next year. There's going to be, I think, the next big thing in AI is going to be a realization that that's the people that will be interacting with AI. So we will have maybe GPT-5 that will be producing avatars and multimedia, right, to spice up the answer, so to speak. But there is also going to be proliferation of very small focused models on kind of giving you nutritional advice only, right? Or maybe giving you an advice on a specific field in your job. So yeah, so taking together this ecosystem probably is going to be interesting. It's probably not going to be HAL 9000 as a single system that you talk to, but it's going to be an ecosystem that's going to show up in your browser as a selection of tools. And at the end of the day, that might look like feel like this is a gigantic HAL 9000 system from 2001 Space Odyssey. And maybe that's dystopian, or maybe that's a great thing. I don't
Well,
know.
it did kill the crew. So we'll say we'll see. I mean, that could be a better topic of will AI see us as being used and in the way, which
Yeah.
might be a better topic for next time. So I just want to wrap up by saying
Mm.
thank you for both your insight into this. So we have learned that in fact GPT is good at math. So
Mm.
very misleading clickbaity title on my part. Thank you,
Mm.
Jack. But yet the interior arguments of why measurement in general might shift with this
Mm.
new capability aren't completely untrue, right? It does
Mm.
put SMEs on the line. Sorry, SMEs, a
Mm.
little bit because because you're too busy and your time is too valuable, you might be the first on the block. I don't know. We're going to see if maybe that's a new topic for another article by me, right? Which is expertise, even to the level of being. I see being instructor not being about an expert, but just being a facilitator. See, I'm just here to get the party going rather than
Mm.
be expert in my field. Maybe for better or worse, right? But getting people engaged in it is the education role, and we'll see if there is no difference in a world where all the work can be done in a minute rather than in weeks. I don't know. I'm gonna maybe unpack that a little bit more. Did I miss anything? Did I miss? I do love the concept of the librarian, though. There's something really kind of snow crashy about that. Like there's this feeling
Mm.
like, hey, it's a benevolent thing. I think of a librarian as one of the more benevolent roles out there, right? They don't have self-interest in mind, more they just want to make better connections between you and other people's ideas. So there are, I kept thinking of the idea of a conductor. Are we all going to be conductors in the future? We just need to wave our wand and wait for music to happen. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the so kind of maybe to finish up, right? Like how good the librarian is supposed to be, right? If you have an easy question to answer, should the librarian be a very advanced professor level kind of persona
Mhm.
that has a very vast knowledge, right? Or maybe if the question is easy, should it be given to somebody who is kind of like a maybe a graduate assistant, right?
Mhm.
Because the question is really simple, and the graduate assistants certainly have less experience than a full professor with a lot of research under his belt. So that's an old educational question also, right? Should introductory classes be taught by graduate assistants or
Mhm.
by full professors? Right? And this can be transferred into the AI discussion, right? Like, hey,
Mhm.
how the AI is supposed to be trained and at what level questions are supposed to be answered, because they could be any question can be answered with that amount of knowledge that the AIs have right now. Any question can be answered really deeply, and maybe that's what you should see, right? I mean, and then you take it from there, right? Or maybe, again, this could be a conversation, right? And the beginning of the conversation with the AI is kind of like an introductory class. And then you are moving deeper and deeper and kind of begin to kind of do something that Google is doing, right? Kind of getting building a profile of the conversation, and then kind of trying to fine tune everything else, right? So that's definitely something that we can kind of put on the schedule as maybe a future conversation as well.
I can't wait. As always, I'm gonna just thank you again, and hopefully anyone who manages to see this, which I hope someone both either reads the article and has some issues that they can help by commenting upon or whatever, or listening to this discussion, which is just a little more chat GPT like, because I appreciate your perspective as always, and I really do think that that's what makes learning fun, is to hear different perspectives around a topic, and
Yeah.
so let us know if this works for you or was interesting. We're very happy to share what we're doing, which is exploring a really interesting new capability and trying to figure out what it's good for. So
Yeah.
signing
Yeah,
out.
definitely. Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, and then scene. So I'll just let you know. So I was having a long conversation with GPT, and what made it so interesting was that it was about one particular thing, and then I don't know if it's changed its mind, but over a longer course of discussion, I wanted to come up with a lesson plan of how to use playing the game The Witness